The iconic Victorian Gothic mansion at 1313 Mockingbird Lane harbored secrets far stranger than the monsters who called it home. From its hidden past life as a romantic comedy set to a second floor demolished 40 years later, the house that spooked America had a wild journey through Hollywood history that few fans ever discovered. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Munsters Mansion. Fact 1. Originally built for a romantic comedy, before the Munster family ever set foot on Mockingbird Lane, their iconic Gothic mansion had a completely different life. As the home of a real-life inventor in a cheerful romantic comedy, the house that would become synonymous with monsters and cobwebs was actually constructed in 1946 for a film called So Goes My Love, which told the story of Hiram Maxim, a turn-of-the-century inventor who created the automatic machine gun and other innovations. The movie starred Donna Mekay and Myrna Loy, and it was a light-hearted romance about Maxim's family life and his eccentric inventions, making the mansion's origins about as far from spooky as you could get. Universal Studios built the house as a full set on Stage 12, which was the studio's largest soundstage at the time, and it was constructed alongside another Victorian-style house, specifically for this production. The mansion was designed in the Second Empire Victorian architectural style, featuring elaborate details and an elegant appearance that fit perfectly with the period setting of the film. All the interior and exterior shots for So Goes My Love were filmed using this soundstage set, giving the house its first role as a symbol of respectable, upper-class American family life. Once filming wrapped on the romantic comedy, both house sets were carefully dismantled and placed into storage, where they sat unused for several years. Nobody at Universal could have predicted that this cheerful inventor's home would one day be transformed into one of television's most recognizable haunted houses, or that it would still be standing on the studio lot more than 70 years later, long after its original film was largely forgotten by audiences. Fact 2. Spent years in storage limbo. After the cameras stopped rolling on So Goes My Love, the Victorian mansion that would eventually become the Munster home faced an uncertain future that involved spending years packed away in darkness. Once the film wrapped in 1946, Universal Studios made the decision to completely dismantle both house sets that had been built for the production, taking them apart piece by piece and placing all the components into storage facilities on the studio lot. This wasn't unusual for the time, as studios often saved expensive sets for potential reuse in future productions, but what made this situation remarkable was just how long the mansion would remain in storage before seeing daylight again. The house sat unused in Universal's storage for nearly half a decade, gathering dust while the studio continued producing other films and television shows throughout the late 1940s. During this time, the dismantled pieces of what would become one of television's most iconic homes were just another forgotten set collecting cobwebs in a warehouse with no clear plans for their future use. It wasn't until the early 1950s that Universal executives decided to build a new exterior residential street on the front section of their lot, and only then did someone remember the Victorian houses sitting in storage. The studio finally pulled the mansion and its companion house out of storage and reassembled them as part of a new street set called River Road, which became one of several residential streets constructed in that area of the backlot. This gave the mansion a second life, allowing it to appear in numerous Universal productions throughout the 1950s before it would eventually be transformed into the Munster home more than a decade after its original construction. Fact 3. The pilot was filmed in color. Most fans of the Munsters have only seen the show in black and white, but the very first pilot episode was actually filmed entirely in vibrant color, giving viewers a completely different look at the mansion and the monster family who lived there. The original pilot, titled My Fair Munster, was shot in color by MCA Television for CBS in 1964, and it revealed details that would remain hidden for decades, including the fact that the mansion's exterior had more subtle shading, and the characters' makeup appeared in hues that audiences wouldn't see until the pilot was finally released on DVD 40 years later. This color pilot wasn't just a test run with different visuals, though, as it also featured different actors in key roles, including Joan Marshall as Herman's wife Phoebe and Nate Derman as young Eddie, before the familiar cast was assembled. After executives reviewed the color pilot, they made the deliberate decision to shoot the entire series in black and white instead. And this choice was driven by two main factors that shaped the show's distinctive look. The most practical reason was cost, since filming in color required significantly more expensive equipment, and many American households still owned black and white television sets in the mid-1960s, making the investment less worthwhile for the studio. The creative reason was equally important, as producers wanted the Munsters to evoke the atmosphere of classic Universal monster movies from the 1930s and 40s, which were all filmed in black and white, and had established the iconic look of characters like Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. The heavy shadows and stark contrast of black and white photography helped create the spooky mood that made the show's comedy work, turning what could have been a colorful sitcom into something that felt genuinely connected to horror movie history. Fact 4. The crooked bat weather vane was intentional. When Universal Studios transformed the Victorian Mansion for the Munsters in 1964, the production designers added several distinctive touches to give the house its signature spooky appearance, but one of the most memorable details was a vampire bat weather vane that sat noticeably crooked on top of the roof. This wasn't an accident or the result of wear and tear over time, but rather a deliberate design choice made to reinforce the show's central concept that the Munster family was charmingly off-kilter and different from their suburban neighbors. The crooked bat weather vane became one of the mansion's most recognizable features, visible in the opening credits and exterior shots throughout the series, and it perfectly captured the show's tone of lovable weirdness mixed with classic horror imagery. The weather vane was part of a larger makeover that included several architectural modifications to transform the elegant Victorian house into something that looked like it belonged to a family of monsters. Along with the crooked bat on top, the design team added a chimney to the structure, altered the third-story octagon tower with its mansard roof into a covered widow's walk with a tented roof, and installed a faux gingerbread gable over the second-story center window. The grounds around the mansion were also dressed with bare dead trees, piles of dried leaves scattered across the lawn, and a stone entrance gate that made the property look appropriately neglected and spooky. All of these changes worked together to create the iconic look that millions of viewers came to associate with 1313 Mockingbird Lane, but it was that purposely askew bat weather vane that really drove home the message that everything about this house and the family living inside it was wonderfully out of alignment with the normal world around them. Fact 5. The address changed during filming. The Munster family's home address is one of the most memorable in television history, but the iconic 1313 Mockingbird Lane almost never existed because the show's creators originally planned to place the mansion at a completely different location. In the early planning stages for the Munsters, the fictional address for the family home was supposed to be 43 Mockingbird Lane in the town of Camelot, New Jersey, which would have given the series a very different feel with its reference to the legendary kingdom associated with King Arthur. However, at some point before actual filming began in 1964, the producers made the decision to change both the address and the location, replacing the original plans with the address that would become synonymous with the show. The new address became 1313 Mockingbird Lane, and the town was changed from Camelot, New Jersey to the fictional city of Mockingbird Heights, though the show never actually specified what state this city was located in during the original series run. The choice of 1313 as the street number was particularly fitting for a family of monsters, since the number 13 has long been associated with bad luck and superstition in Western culture, making it the perfect address for a household that included Frankenstein's monster, vampires, and a werewolf boy. The repeated number 13 also made the address more memorable and gave it a rhythmic quality that rolled off the tongue easily, which helped cement it in viewers' minds across generations. Later versions of the show would suggest that Mockingbird Heights was located somewhere in the outlying areas near Los Angeles, but the original series kept the location deliberately vague, allowing the Munsters to exist in their own peculiar corner of suburban America. Fact 6. Interior and exterior were never together. Despite appearing seamless on television, the Munster Mansion that viewers saw each week was actually an elaborate illusion created by filming in two completely separate locations that were never physically connected to each other. Every time the show needed an exterior shot of the house, whether it was the family arriving home or guests approaching the front door, those scenes were filmed using the facade on Universal Studios' backlot, which was essentially just the front wall and roof of a house with nothing behind it. Meanwhile, all of the interior scenes showing the family's living room, kitchen, dining room, staircase, and Grandpa's laboratory were filmed on sound stages numbered 30 and 32 inside Universal's studio buildings, which were located in a different area of the lot entirely and had no connection whatsoever to the outdoor facade. This separation meant that the Munster Mansion, despite being one of television's most famous houses, never actually existed as a real, complete building at any point during the show's production. The outdoor facade was designed to look impressive from the front for exterior photography, but if you walked around to the back, you would have found nothing but wooden supports holding up the false front, with no rooms or interior spaces of any kind. The soundstage interiors, on the other hand, were built as individual room sets with removable walls to allow cameras and crew to move around, and these sets had no exterior walls or windows that looked out onto actual scenery. This method of splitting interior and exterior filming was standard practice for television production at the time, as it gave directors much more control over lighting, sound, and camera angles than would be possible in a real house. But it does mean that the unified, lived-in feeling of the Munster home was purely a creation of careful editing and continuity work. Fact 7. The Beaver's neighbor was a haunted house. Years before Herman and Lily Munster moved in, the mansion at 1313 Mockingbird Lane was already playing the role of the neighborhood's scary house on another classic television series set on the same Universal Studios street. The future Munster home appeared in 2 episodes of Leave It to Beaver during the show's 4th season in 1961, where it was portrayed as the abandoned and supposedly haunted old McMahon house that the local children feared and avoided. In the episode titled Mistaken Identity, the house became central to the plot when a character named Richard breaks one of its windows and tries to blame young Theodore Cleaver for the damage, while in another episode called Community Chest, Beaver and his friend Gilbert nervously approach the spooky mansion, which had "No trespassing" and "No solicitors" signs posted on the porch steps warning visitors to stay away. This early appearance established the house as something frightening and mysterious in the wholesome world of Leave It to Beaver, creating an interesting connection between 2 very different shows that shared the same backlot location at Universal Studios. The mansion was perfect for this role because its Victorian Gothic architecture naturally suggested something old, abandoned, and potentially haunted, even before any special modifications were made to its appearance. When the Munsters premiered just 3 years later in 1964, the house received its famous makeover with dead trees, a crooked bat weather vane, and darker paint to enhance its spooky qualities. But it's fascinating to know that the building was already serving as the neighborhood haunted house in another series, almost as if it was practicing for its future role as home to television's most famous monster family. Fact 8. Demolished for Desperate Housewives. The Munster Mansion survived decades of Hollywood productions largely intact, but that all changed in the mid-2000s when the producers of Desperate Housewives decided the house was simply too recognizable and needed a dramatic transformation. During the first season of Desperate Housewives, which began filming in 2004 on Universal's Colonial Street backlot, the production crew deliberately avoided using the former Munster house because they worried audiences would be distracted by seeing such an iconic television landmark in their new show. However, when plans were made for the second season in 2005, the decision was made to introduce the Applewhite family as new residents of Wisteria Lane, and they needed this particular house for the storyline, which meant something had to be done about its famous appearance. The solution was both dramatic and permanent, as the entire second floor of the mansion was physically demolished, and all of the remaining architectural details on the first floor were stripped away and removed. Once the demolition was complete, a new second floor was constructed with a somewhat similar overall design, but the architectural style was fundamentally changed from the original mansard gable to a gambrel gable, which gave the house a more Dutch colonial revival appearance instead of its Victorian Gothic look. This radical makeover erased most of the distinctive Munster features that had made the house instantly recognizable to television viewers for 4 decades. The house became known as 4351 Wisteria Lane on Desperate Housewives, and it served as home to 4 different families during the show's 8-year run, including the Applewhites, Alma Hodge, and the couple Bob Hunter and Lee McDermott, with the house consistently being portrayed as a location where bad things happened to its residents. Fact 9. A Texas couple built it with no blueprints. In the spring of 2001, a couple named Sandra and Charles McKee from Waxahachie, Texas, decided to build a full-scale, livable replica of the Munster Mansion, but they faced an unusual challenge because no architectural blueprints or floor plans for the fictional house had ever existed. Since the original television production used separate sound stages for interior scenes and an outdoor facade for exterior shots, there was never any need to create actual architectural drawings showing how all the rooms connected or what the complete house would look like as a unified structure. The McKees solved this problem through an incredibly dedicated process that involved watching all 70 episodes of the original series over and over again, pausing and rewinding the footage constantly to catch every detail they could observe. Sandra McKee would watch scenes and literally count how many steps it took for Lily Munster to walk from one room to another, using these observations to estimate distances and figure out the approximate layout of the house. The couple studied camera angles, background details, doorways, and hallways to piece together a mental map of how the mansion should be arranged, essentially reverse engineering the entire structure from what appeared on screen. They looked at pictures of the exterior facade and used those along with the episode footage to design their house completely from scratch, creating their own plans as they went. The result was a 5,825 square foot mansion that replicated the Munster home right down to specific details like the crooked weather vane and the grand staircase that opens up to reveal Spot the Dragon underneath. Construction was completed in 2002, and original cast members Al Lewis and Butch Patrick attended the grand opening, with Lewis reportedly moved to tears by the recreation. Fact 10. A scale model used dried oregano for landscaping. When the Munsters Today went into production in 1988 as a revival of the original series, the producers faced a significant problem because they felt the iconic mansion was just as important to the show as the characters themselves, but the original house facade on the Universal backlot had deteriorated so badly that it couldn't be used for filming. Rather than trying to restore the dilapidated original or build a new full-size facade, the production team came up with a creative and cost-effective solution by constructing an authentic scale model replica of the mansion that could be filmed to look like the real thing. This miniature version was built with careful attention to detail and was designed to match the appearance of the house from the original 1960s series, allowing the new show to maintain visual continuity with its predecessor. One of the most unusual aspects of creating this scale model involved the landscaping around the miniature mansion, which needed to look appropriately dead and overgrown to match the spooky atmosphere of the Munster property. The model makers discovered that dried oregano, the common cooking herb found in any grocery store, worked perfectly as a substitute for dead foliage and dried grass when scaled down to miniature size. They decorated the model's garden with this dried oregano, which gave the tiny yard the same neglected, withered appearance that the original mansion's grounds had displayed in the classic series. The scale model was so well constructed and filmed so carefully that many viewers watching the Munsters Today never realized they were looking at a miniature house rather than a full-size building, and the oregano landscaping was completely convincing on camera, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions work best in television production. Fact 11. The house was too recognizable to use. By 1987, when plans were being made to film the pilot episode for The Munsters Today, the production team discovered that the original mansion facade on Universal's Colonial Street backlot had fallen into such a terrible state and of disrepair that it was essentially unusable for filming. The house that had once been carefully maintained and modified for the original series had spent the years since 1966 appearing in various other productions, and each new show had made changes or allowed the structure to deteriorate further until it no longer resembled the iconic Munster home that fans remembered. The architectural details that had been specifically added for the Munsters, including the distinctive gingerbread gable over the second-story center window and the special columns and railings of the Widow's Walk Tower, had been removed during renovations in the early 1980s, and the overall condition of the facade had become so poor that it couldn't convincingly portray the mansion anymore. This situation left the producers of The Munsters Today with a serious problem, since they couldn't film new exterior footage of the house that was central to the show's identity and setting. Their solution was to piece together exterior shots using two different sources that didn't involve the deteriorated backlot facade at all. For long shots and establishing scenes of the mansion, they relied on old stock footage that had been filmed for the 1966 theatrical movie Munster, Go Home, which still showed the house in its proper Munster appearance, and they supplemented this archival material with new footage of their specially constructed scale model for any additional exterior shots they needed throughout the series' run. Fact 12. It lived on Colonial Street with Hollywood royalty. After production wrapped on the Munsters in 1966, Universal Studios made a major decision to replace and reorganize their entire front lot, which meant the mansion and many other historic sets needed to be moved to a new location on the backlot. The Munster house was relocated to an area called Colonial Street, which was one of Universal's most famous and frequently used exterior street sets, and this move placed the mansion in the company of other iconic television and movie facades that had their own legendary histories. Most notably, the Munster Mansion became neighbors with the house that had served as the Cleaver family home on Leave It to Beaver, creating an interesting situation where two of the most recognizable homes from 1960s television sitcoms stood on the same street, directly across from each other. Colonial Street became the mansion's home for decades, and during this time the house continued to appear in numerous productions that needed a Victorian-style residence for their stories. The facade showed up in the 1989 Tom Hanks comedy The Burbs, where it played the home of a character named Ricky Butler, portrayed by Corey Feldman, and it appeared in episodes of the detective series Murder, She Wrote, along with other shows like Dragnet and Coach, starring Craig T. Nelson. The mansion also made appearances in episodes of Quantum Leap and many other television productions throughout the 1980s and 1990s. This continued use meant that sharp-eyed viewers could occasionally spot the former Munster home playing different roles in various movies and shows, though it rarely looked exactly as it had during its Munster days, since each production would redress or modify the facade to suit their particular needs. Fact 13. The mansion name was never used in the show, despite the fact that millions of fans and even Universal Studios itself have referred to the building as the Munster Mansion for decades. This particular name was never actually spoken or used at any point during the original television series that ran from 1964 to 1966. Throughout all 70 episodes of the show, the characters simply referred to their home as their house, or mentioned the address at 1313 Mockingbird Lane, but they never called it a mansion or gave it any special title that set it apart from other residences. The name Munster Mansion only came into use after the series ended, when Universal Studios needed a way to identify and market the famous facade as it continued to appear in other productions, and became a highlight of the studio's backlot tours. The term became the official designation that Universal used when discussing the set with tourists and in production materials, and over time it became so widely adopted by fans and media that most people assumed it had always been the house's name. This disconnect between what the building is called in popular culture and what it was actually called on the show creates an interesting example of how a nickname can become more famous than the original reference. Within the fictional world of the Munsters, the house was simply the family's home on Mockingbird Lane, and the characters treated it as an ordinary residence, despite its spooky appearance and unusual features like secret passages and a dungeon laboratory. The Munster family never seemed to think there was anything particularly special or mansion-like about their dwelling, which was part of the show's central joke that this family of monsters considered themselves completely normal and couldn't understand why their neighbors found them strange. Fact 14. It became a featured studio tour attraction in 1964. The Munster House became an official tourist attraction remarkably quickly, as Universal Studios began prominently featuring the mansion in their backlot tour advertising materials in 1964, the exact same year that the television series premiered on CBS. This timing is particularly interesting because the studio was promoting the house as a must-see destination for visitors before the show had even aired enough episodes to become a proven hit or establish itself as a cultural phenomenon. Universal had launched a modernized version of their studio tour on July 15, 1964, just a few months before the Munsters debuted on September 24 of that year, and the tour was designed to give visitors a behind-the-scenes look at how movies and television shows were made by taking them through the working backlot on trams. The Munsters house quickly became one of the main features that tour guides would point out to guests riding through the backlot on what Universal called the glamour tram, and the distinctive Victorian Gothic facade with its dead trees and spooky appearance made it an easy landmark to spot and discuss during the tour. Universal clearly recognized that the house had immediate visual appeal and marketing potential, even before audiences had fully embraced the show, and the studio was correct in their assessment, since the Munsters did become a hit during its first season. The house remained a highlight of the Universal Studios tour for decades afterward, maintaining its status as one of the most photographed and recognizable locations on the lot even long after the original series ended, and tour guides continued to mention the mansion's Munster connection whenever trams passed by, ensuring that generations of visitors would associate the house with the Munster family. Fact 15. The Texas replica owner experienced paranormal activity. Sandra McKee and her husband Charles lived full-time in their meticulously crafted Munsters Mansion replica in Waxahachie, Texas, for 11 years after completing construction in 2002, but their experience living in the spooky house turned out to be more unsettling than they had anticipated. During their time as residents of the mansion, Sandra began documenting a series of strange occurrences that happened throughout the house, keeping a detailed journal of unexplained events that she couldn't easily dismiss or explain away. The incidents became frequent enough and unusual enough that she eventually decided to take a more scientific approach to investigating what was happening, so she installed a camera in the upstairs hallway to see if she could capture any evidence of the strange activity on video. However, when Sandra started reviewing the footage that the camera had recorded during the night while she and Charles were sleeping, she found whatever she saw disturbing enough that she made the decision to stop watching the recordings altogether. In her own words, she explained that she thought it was just too spooky and that she didn't want to know what was happening in the house while they slept, suggesting that the footage showed something that made her uncomfortable enough to abandon her investigation. One particularly strange incident that Sandra shared involved a spring day when she heard her husband's voice calling to her from outside through the open windows, though the details of what made this event unusual weren't fully explained. The McKees eventually moved out of the Munsters Mansion and into a brighter house next door about 6 years ago, though they continue to give tours and host events at the replica, and Sandra's journal documenting the unexplained experiences remains as a curious reminder that living in a recreation of a haunted house might bring its own unexpected mysteries.